Hello, everybody, and welcome to the risk webinar. I'm going to let the participants come in the room here. Give everybody just a few seconds to come on in. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. If you're where I am in the central United States, sort of mid-afternoon here. Welcome to those of you on the East Coast, West Coast, and all around the globe. Nice to see you all. Not really see you all, but nice to see you come in. I'm going to let everybody come in, get seated in the virtual space, and we'll get here in just a second. Hi, everybody. Hello, hello. Good. It looks like we're starting to tail off there. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about what to expect in this webinar, and then we'll get going. My name is Aaron Seitz. I'm the head of teacher development at Synthesis, but for the purposes of this webinar, what's important is I also work on the team that writes the experiences that your students go through. So whether that's foundation or the weekly classes, I'm sort of here in that capacity. And I want to give you in this webinar a general overview of what your student is going to be exploring this month as they go through their weekly classes. I also want to give you a more sort of specific look, a specific focus for each week, so that you can see, what your child will be learning. And then also sort of a more general framework about, the philosophy that underlies all of this, right? The philosophy that Synthesis uses when we approach concepts, because it's not the same as school. At the end there, I'm going to leave some time for Q&A, but also I'm joined by members of the concept team, members of the customer happiness team. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll notice a Q&A button. And if you have any questions as I'm speaking and you throw those out, my colleagues will be happy to answer those questions. But also, I may answer those in the very next second. So don't worry if you want to save some of those for the end. Okay. With that being said, I think we've got a nice group here, so I'm going to get started. Let's do it. If I'm a Synthesis parent like you, I know two things to be true. One, I know that the teachers will never coach my student on how to play the games, right? Not only do we not tell them how to play the games, we don't often tell them the rules of the games, right? That's something that your student figures out. That's sort of the point of Synthesis. But we do coach your students in some of those skills, right? How to become better collaborators, communicators, right? How to think through their decisions. That's something that we do have an active hand in. So if I'm a parent, that sort of leaves me wondering, like, what are the teachers going to be saying about the concept of the month, right? What are they going to be saying about risk? Are they going to be teaching my child that risk is good? Because I don't know if I want my child engaging in sort of risky behaviors or glamorizing high risk because of Synthesis. Will they be teaching my student that, risk is bad? I mean, risk is essential to innovation and entrepreneurship and science and medicine and, experimentation. It's part of life. So the first question sort of is, what will Synthesis be telling your student to think about risk? And it's sort of a bit of a trick question there, because the answer is we won't be telling your student what to think about risk. And here's why. Parents, your view on where acceptable risk begins and ends, your view on that is different than mine. And if we spoke person to person, some of you would think that my views on risk are too conservative. Others of you would think my views on risk are too tolerant. But either way, our job, the job of the teachers, is not to form the opinion for your student, right? That's going to be between you and them. So what is our job? When you start to have those conversations with your student, right? When you start to have conversations about risk, right now at the age they are, those conversations are about physical risks, perhaps about social risks. As they get older, you're going to have conversations with them about financial risk and professional risk. When you enter into those conversations with them, we want your child to sort of already have a file folder in their brain called risk, right? And right now, it's totally okay if there's nothing in it. Because as your student goes to their weekly class at Synthesis, instead of sort of the broad sort of foundational goals of collaboration and communication, and decision-making, we're going to be using the weekly class this month to really deliberately, intentionally focus on the concept of risk. And so over the next 4 weeks, the challenge for your student is going to be to grapple with this concept, right? To engage with it, to interact with it, and to see how that feels when they interact with it, right? Because we've set up some scenarios for them to experience, and we've got some really good ones. So without giving too much away, what I want to do is sort of tell you what to expect. And I'm going to share a screen here. What you can expect from Synthesis when it comes to the topic of risk. Okay, let's go week by week, and you can start to see how we've designed these experiences for your students. In the very first week, we're going to start simple. How are your students currently conceiving of risk? And to do that, we're going to play 3 different scenarios. 2 of those will be games, and 1 of them will be a real-life conundrum having to do with a space agency. And we're simply going to ask the same question each time. In each of these, what defines high risk? What defines low risk, and why? Now, parents, these first 2 questions will seem easy, and your students will have no problem articulating what is high risk and what is low risk. The last question, though, will be harder. And that's because the last question, as simple as it is, asks your students to sort of articulate the internal rules, right, that govern their thinking about risk. And we want to bring out those internal rules, not to tell them that they're right or wrong. But if your student can surface those rules, they can start to test their own ideas about risk. And that leads us to week 2, where we start to test those. So in the second week, we're going to play something known as a ladder challenge. And in this challenge, teams are going to work together to try and get a high score, very simple. And the objective also is simple: try and connect to headquarters. Now, you don't have to know how the game works, but what's going to happen is the farther away that these headquarters are, the higher the score, which is going to push teams towards longer headquarters. But here's the twist, parents. Fail to connect those 2, and your team score drops to 0. How far is too far, right? On the ladder that they climb, how high is too high? So what we're asking here really is about the sort of personal spectrum of risk tolerance and risk aversion. What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? What is the line? And arguably more important, will this cause some conflict if I'm on your team and I say, let's push these headquarters, excuse me about that, let's push these headquarters very far. And you say, no, I want to play it safe. What do we do when we don't agree? And I sort of want to pause there, because think about how fundamental this question is, right? How do we navigate relationships when there's differing tolerance levels? Consider whether or not that happens on a sports team. Are there different tolerances for risk on a sports team? Yes. What about in personal relationships? Yes. Will that conflict happen in their professional lives? Yes. So the reason I'm pausing here is because this is how Synthesis is going to approach concepts in general, right? We could just tell them, we could just tell students, like, hey, differences in risk will cause conflict, and so please open your workbook to chapter 2, and we'll do some exercises together. But that's what school would do, right? We're not going to be doing that, because when we put them in this experience and they sense this conflict, and we can ask them about this conflict, it becomes the problem, right? And not problem in a bad way, right? But problem in the sense of that's why they're here, right? Your student is at Synthesis to solve problems, not to have problems solved for them, right? But to engage in the problem solving themselves. And so when we get to ask, what is the benefit or the drawback of risk tolerance? What do you do when you're on a team that has a different sense of what's safe and what's too far? They'll have ideas. And again, we won't say, you're right, you're wrong. We'll say, let's test those out. Let's try that the next time that we play. And that gives your student an opportunity to work through this super important question. In the third week, we're going to give them more opportunities to work through risk in a different sort of perspective. So far, the scenarios that they've been encountering are helping them get a sense of their intuition about risk, right? When does something feel too risky, or when does it feel safe? But that's one side of the coin, right? We're going to put them in week 3 into scenarios that require them to get information, right? To use reason to evaluate risk rather than intuition. And actually, I'd love to try a little experiment with you, parents, if that's quite all right. I won't use this example in class, okay? But I want to try a quick exercise with you so that you can get the point. At the bottom of your screen, there's a chat. It has a little call out button. Please open up that chat and it'll have a blank bar on the side. I'm going to ask you a question, parents, and I'm going to give you 5 seconds to write yes or no in that chat. Those are the only 2 options that you have. So get your fingers ready on the keyboard, because I'm going to ask you a question, count down from 5, and when I hit 0, you will have written yes or no in that chat. Okay, here we go. The question is simple. Parents, if you're on a ladder, is it a physical risk to jump off that ladder? Yes, no, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, stop. All right, stop. Scroll up and down the 92 answers that we have. And although I should have done a poll, that would have been cool. But what we see here is definitely more yeses than nos. Okay, so let's call it, again, without being scientific, let's sort of say 60-40, 70-30 yeses to nos. Okay, that's fine. Some of you are feeling that risk. Some of you are feeling like it's not risky. Let's try something new. I'm going to ask you now to ask me one question in the chat, and I will answer 3 questions. Of the ones that you pull up, I'll answer 3. So what question do you have about that scenario? I said, you're on a ladder. Is there a physical I can already see, Lisa, you're doing it. What questions do you have for me? Lisa asks, how high is the ladder? The ladder is 3 feet tall. It's a step ladder. From which rung am I jumping off the ladder? From the first rung. Lawrence, is it risky to walk on the sidewalk? I'll do you one better, Lawrence. You're not going to land on a sidewalk. You're going to land on what's beneath the ladder, Marcelo, a comfy, really comfy mattress, let's say. All right, a soft landing. So now that you've asked me those questions, let's restate it. From a 3-foot step ladder, you being on the very first rung, jumping onto a very soft surface, is it a physical risk to jump off that ladder? Now, yes or no? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And parents, look what happened, right? Except for Lawrence, who still says yes, almost 99% said no. But why? The reason why is because the information that you brought in reduced the uncertainty. And now the conflict that we may have had with this sort of 60-40 before, I think it's risky. I think it's don't. I don't think it's risky. Now we've reduced that uncertainty. And in doing so, we've reduced that conflict. So back to the sharing of the screen. The point in session 3 is to give them opportunities, right? To, instead of leaping before they look, so to say, to look before they leap, right? This experience is going to give them 3 scenarios. One will be entrepreneurial. One will be this sort of probability challenge. And then one will be a same sort of headquarter challenge, but on a grid where they can actually calculate the risk of moving too far. So with this, we're going to be able to explore these important questions, right? The relationship between risk and uncertainty. And then we can broaden out that question. Are there areas of our life in which gathering more information will help reduce uncertainty and mitigate risk? Because in some areas of life, there are. And in some areas of life, there are not. And so we'll be asking your student to reflect on those. In the final week, then, moving on to the final week, we're going to give them an opportunity to put these together, right? And in the final week, they're going to be observing other teams play and then using the information from other teams to inform their strategy. And then they'll also be playing a surprise opponent, a synthesis robot named Athena. And they're going to watch Athena, the robot, play this game on this map. And then they'll collaborate on a strategy to see if they can defeat her, right? Because she has her own programmed risk tolerance levels. Some of your students will beat Athena. Some of the classes won't, but that's not the point. The point is to revisit some of the major questions for the month to see if their thinking has changed. Now, at the end of this month, what we don't want is for them to have to feel like they're repeating back something that we've told them. What are the three main? No. What is the definition? No. The real question here, what did you discover? What did you discover about risk over the last 4 weeks? And why does that matter? Because the practice of what did you discover is deeper than risk. It's really the philosophy of synthesis, right? What they're learning to do this month, what they're practicing this month is engaging with complexity, right? And then taking that complex topic, putting their mind to it, and exploring the edges of it until it starts to take shape and order in their mind. And this is a process we want them to do week after week, month after month, concept after concept. The conclusions that they draw, parents, belong to them. Is it possible that different students will have different conclusions about risk? Yes. Yes. And I'll sort of play the other side, right? I'll state the counter argument from conventional teaching, right? Well, why don't you just give them the definition in the first week and then tell them the important parts of legal risk and financial risk and personal risk and social risk and inflation and liquidity and opportunity cost and taxes and interest rates and return on investment. Okay, granted, we won't be going into all of the area, right? The 11, areas of risk management. We have 4 weeks, 4 hours. But I want to explain why. There is a difference between concepts and content. In education, right? In education, content is narrow, right? It's concrete. It is the stuff that you learn, and it's passive, right? It is received by students from teachers. But at synthesis, concepts are different. Concepts are broad, they're abstract, and they're active, meaning that students experience concepts in a way that they can't experience content. And here's why this is significant. Here are the implications of that. When your student builds a personal relationship with a concept, the content that later comes, right? It has somewhere to land. It has a folder in their brain to land inside of them. And I think what education gets wrong a lot of the time, conventional education is that it shovels content into students' brains and it goes right down. It doesn't stick to anything and it falls straight down. Teachers feel great. Students feel like they haven't learned anything. So we want to change that. What can you do, parents, to support your student? The truth is that as much or as little as you want, honestly, you don't have to do anything. Synthesis is designed to bring your student on a journey of self-discovery, self-improvement, and agency and independence. So sometimes support just means letting your student explore the edges, right, without judgment. But if you want to carry on the conversation, you've got those options. On the website, the February concept also has a link that you can click that has some discussion prompts, some dinner table discussions that are actually really fun. We've tested those out. They're awesome. And you can also just carry on the conversation at home, being curious about what the student went through. Pro tip here from a synthesis teacher and a parent, don't ask, what did you learn at synthesis today? Because just like your parents asked you that question and you said, I don't know, nothing. Kids are going to say the same thing. Instead, ask this question. What were the scenarios this week? What were the challenges? What did they put you through? And then when they say, now you've got the opportunity to say, whoa, how'd you approach that? What was that like? How did it end up? What would you have done differently? Cool thing about that is the scenarios that we create are broad enough to relate to life. You saw abstract games, but as they start to explain the process that they went through, you'll be able to say something that we won't as teachers. You'll be able to say, interesting, I have a similar situation at my job, right? One team wants to go this direction, but leadership wants to go this direction. Student, what do you think we should do? If your student is 8, 10, 12, 14, and they're getting the opportunity to connect those dots, that's powerful partnership. The good news is that we're going to be working on this with your student too, right? So just because risk is in the month of February in the weekly classes doesn't mean that in March risk goes away. It means that that conversation that starts with risk will carry on into, it will deepen the conversation of first principles that comes in March. When we discuss second order thinking, is there risk weighing of trade-offs in second order thinking? Of course. So we want the concepts to feel more like a network, right? More like a sphere than individual silos. So you'll hear your student talking about those different things. Okay. Ultimately, I think I'll stop sharing here and leave it open to some questions. But the real truth here, parents, is that the journey through synthesis and the journey through concepts, education in general, is not, it's not a race. It's not a light switch that students just turn on. And it's also not a straight line, right? Which I think we have to remember. I think to love learning, which is really the goal, learning should feel light, right? And fun and engaging, but it should also feel significant, like it matters in the world at large. And risk is both. I think it should also, the enjoyment that they feel, that they come to session with, should also feel that tension, that there's something that has, weight here. And we want to create that too. All your student needs, they don't need to study up on risk. All they need is an open mind, right? And the intention each week that they're at synthesis to improve, right? With those two things, we'll take care of the rest. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to turn my attention to any questions that haven't been answered yet. So parents, if you've got any questions that you're wondering about, great, this is one that I'll take right away. Implicit in risk and learning from risk is failure. How can we help our kids who really fear failure? Absolutely. That's a great question. So you're right. Risk is about failure, right? And so we don't want to run away from that. We want to put them in situations where they have to grapple with that. And the nice thing is that fear of failure has to do with the stakes, that the consequences of that failure. And at synthesis, right, in the games, they are both high stakes because, right, it's a team, people are counting on you, but also there are no stakes, right? Because the game disappears, the scores disappear. There is no leaderboard at synthesis. And so it's a perfect opportunity for kids who fear failure to work on developing that sort of like weighing and that resilience from that. Thanks everybody in the chat for those comments. Marcelo asks, how much of our talk should we share, or can we, or should we share with our kids? Oh, thank you for asking that, Marcelo. Parents and anybody watching this on repeat, don't you give away the secrets of synthesis. Don't you do it. Don't you do it. Part of what we do has to do with students discovering. And I love parents who want to help, right? But sometimes parents, when you help by telling them, hey, you're going to be playing this challenge, and here's the strategy that's going to work, you're taking away that discovery for them. So Marcelo, I love that question. My strategy for you is, you don't know. What happened this week? Now you might know because you watched this webinar, or you participated in this webinar, but you don't need to prepare them. I think it's better for you to be the curious observer, the supportive parent, than to feel like you need to prep them. Because really it's their process, right? What we're coaching here is their inside out process. And I think the tension that we feel, parents, is that we want to help their process outside in. And sometimes that prohibits or slows down their ability to take it away. Artie says, good point about talking to the kids about what challenges instead of what did you learn? Yeah, Artie, you know as well as I do, right? When I ask my students, what'd you learn at school today? They're like, But if I ask, what challenges came up? Now they can tell me that sort of thing. Amy asked, quantitative or qualitative risk, which is easier to comprehend for kids? Well, that's $1 million question, Amy. We're going to give them exposure to both. But as far as which one is easier to comprehend for kids, I think you know the answer, which is it depends. It really depends on the student. So what we've noticed, we've run these sessions before in beta tests that students have taken part in. And what we've seen is some students really grab on to that intuitive sense of risk. They can just feel when something feels off. But give them an actual number and say there are let's say 20 spaces and you have 18 moves, is it best to go 18 or is it best to go 9 moves away? I'm just throwing those numbers out there. And it's interesting because some of them will put their heads to that calculation and other will be like, I don't know, I'm just sort of feeling 11. Okay, that's fine. It's fine. Again, Amy, I don't want to form an opinion for your student. There are no quizzes, no tests. What I'm hoping that they do is encounter risk in ways that makes them feel both more comfortable, but also more curious about where those sort of weak spots are. Like, yeah, I didn't grab onto that. That's okay. It's okay. Your students have a long life ahead of them. And what we're going to be starting them is just with these enough experiences so that they can start linking these ideas to future experiences they have. Lonnie has sort of a general question here. How do we deal with frustration when they feel like their team doesn't listen to them? Lonnie, yeah, right. That conflict will happen, right? It will happen. And so, again, you saw it. It's designed to happen when we put students on teams where we ask them to sort of stretch their risk tolerance until they feel those edges. Where does that frustration come from, right? It comes from that sense that what I'm saying isn't being heard by others. So that itself is a communication issue, I think, that is deeper than just risk. And I think that that's another sort of core synthesis foundational skill that's going to be practiced each week. Now, I'm not mentioning that in risk because there's not a week for that, but civility, communication, decision-making, coordinating, meeting new people and working on teams, forming bonds. These are something that underneath all sessions are constantly going to be happening. Okay. I'm going to put one more thing on the screen, which is 2 email addresses. Half an hour is not a long time. I want to thank everybody for being here. When you get off of this webinar, you're going to think, oh, darn it, I wish I would have asked another question. Or you might be saying, I wish I would have gotten more from that. I actually have a follow-up question. If you have general questions about synthesis, here's your email, questions@synthesis.com. You ask, we answer. If you have any questions about risk, about concepts, follow-up questions, curiosities, anything like that, this is my personal email address at Synthesis. You reach out to me here, and I'll get back to you personally to talk more about those. Thanks so much, everybody. It's been really nice to talk with you, and I look forward to any future questions that you have. Have a great month at Synthesis, and we'll see you around. Bye, everybody.